We have been told for centuries, basically, that alcohol is this ultimate social lubricant.
Right, yeah. It's totally embedded in our culture.
Exactly. It's the go-to substance to get in the mood or, lower inhibitions and spark intimacy. But if you actually look at the human nervous system under a microscope, alcohol doesn't lubricate anything.
No, it really doesn't.
In fact, chronic use actively melts the very wiring required for human arousal. So, welcome to the deep dive. Today we're focusing on you, the listener, and we're unpacking a highly complex, honestly incredibly misunderstood biological process.
Which is how your central nervous system actually controls female sexual arousal.
And we were doing that by looking at how two very common but pharmacologically opposite substances, chronic alcohol consumption and medical cannabis, intercept and, well, alter those delicate signals.
Yeah, the diagnostic landscape of human sexuality is often treated as this really murky water.
Like it's just a mood.
Right, we tend to think of arousal as just an emotional state, right? Like a mood you have to catch. But by looking under the hood at the actual wiring and plumbing of the body, we can demystify how these systems truly operate.
And that is exactly our mission today. We've gathered a massive stack of medical journals, clinical studies, university research outputs. So we aren't just philosophizing about intimacy here.
No, we're looking at the raw mechanics.
The raw mechanics of how the brain talks to the body and what happens when you introduce external chemicals into that dialogue. So for anyone listening who thinks desire is just this, fleeting feeling, they need to realize it's actually a massive physical chain reaction.
It is. And to understand the disruption, we really have to start with the baseline of that chain reaction.
Okay, let's lay the groundwork.
So it originates in highly specialized brain structures. We're talking about areas like the hypothalamus and the amygdala.
The emotional centers, basically.
Exactly. These are the centers that process emotional cues, sensory inputs, memories. So when a person experiences a stimulus they find arousing, these brain centers process that input and convert it into a literal physical electrical pulse.
And that pulse has to travel a really long way to actually do anything. I mean, I was fascinated to read in our sources about how this signal travels down the spinal cord, specifically targeting the sacral segments of the lower spine.
Yeah, the S2, S3, and S4 segments.
Right. Which makes total sense why, people with lower back injuries can surprisingly experience sudden impacts to their sex life. Because that is exactly where the primary cables run.
The anatomy there is just crucial. From those lower spine segments, the message gets picked up by the pudendal nerve.
Pudendal nerve.
Right, which basically acts as the main high-speed neural highway directly into the pelvic region.
Okay.
If that nerve doesn't fire, it simply does not matter how mentally in the mood the brain is.
Wow.
Yeah, the physical response just won't follow.
And when that signal finally arrives at the destination, it triggers the release of specific chemical messengers. I was looking at two in particular from the research. There's nitric oxide and vasoactive intestinal peptide.
Which scientists mercifully just call VIP.
Yes, thank goodness. VIP is much easier to say. So what do those actually do?
Well, those two messengers have a very direct mechanical function. Normally, the smooth muscles in the local pelvic tissues are naturally clenched tight.
Okay, they're tense.
Right, they are in a constant state of tension, holding back blood flow. But when nitric oxide and VIP flood the area, they command those smooth muscles to suddenly and rapidly relax.
Which just opens the floodgates, right?
Exactly. Blood rushes into the surface layers of the vaginal tissue, and the capillary inflow becomes incredibly heavy.
Okay.
Under normal, unaroused conditions, your local tissues are constantly reabsorbing sodium from the surrounding fluids just to maintain a dry basal state.
So they're actively keeping things dry.
Right. But when that massive surge of blood rushes in due to the nitric oxide and VIP, the local sodium reabsorption system gets completely overwhelmed. It simply can't keep up with the new pressure.
So the pressure literally forces fluid out through the tissue walls.
Yes, that is the biological mechanism of vaginal transudate.
Transudate.
Yeah. That pressure pushes out about 3 to 5 milliliters of fluid, creating the natural lubrication that is essential for comfortable, pleasurable intercourse.
Yeah.
It is an entirely blood flow-driven process.
Okay, let's unpack this baseline for a second because visualizing it helps immensely, I think. This entire process is basically like a hyper-advanced smart home system.
Oh, I like that.
Right, like the brain is the central hub processing all the environmental inputs. The pudendal nerve is the Wi-Fi signal carrying the command downstairs.
Downstairs, exactly.
And nitric oxide and VIP are the specific digital codes that tell the local plumbing to turn the faucets on.
That's a great way to look at it because
Right.
the central hub, The signal and the local hardware all have to work in perfect synchronization for the system to function.
Which makes it incredibly vulnerable to interference.
Highly vulnerable.
So if natural arousal requires this hyper-precise, high-speed neural Wi-Fi, what happens when we flood the body with a chemical famous for slowing the brain down?
You mean alcohol?
Let's look at alcohol, yeah.
Yeah.
Culturally, it's the classic icebreaker, but physiologically, it is a central nervous system depressant.
It is. And it achieves that depressing effect by binding to GABA receptors in the brain.
And GABA is an inhibitory thing, right?
Yeah, GABA is an inhibitory neurotransmitter. So when alcohol enters the system and binds there, it essentially throws a heavy blanket over your neural pathways. It slows down nerve signals across the board.
And in the short term, I guess that slowing down can actually feel good. It lowers anxiety, it, quiets that self-conscious voice in your head, which is why people feel that initial spike in desire.
Right, the mental barriers drop.
But it creates a profound physiological mismatch. Your mind says go, but the Wi-Fi signal to the body is dropping packets. The physical signals traveling down that pudendal nerve are being actively blunted.
Exactly. You end up with reduced physical sensitivity, even if your mind is fully on board.
Yeah.
But the disruption goes far beyond just the electrical wiring. We also have to look at the plumbing side of your smart home analogy.
Okay, what does alcohol do to the plumbing?
Well, alcohol suppresses a hormone called vasopressin.
Oh, I read up on vasopressin. It's the body's anti-diuretic hormone, right?
You're right.
It's the chemical manager that tells your kidneys to hold on to water and keep the body hydrated.
So when alcohol suppresses that manager, your kidneys go into overdrive flushing out fluids. You urinate more, and you become systemically dehydrated.
Which everyone knows from the morning after.
Right, the hangover headache. But that dehydration doesn't just give you a terrible headache. It directly dries out your body's mucosal tissues, your mouth, your eyes, and heavily, your vaginal lubrication.
Wow, so it's a direct mechanical block.
Even if the nitric oxide manages to fire perfectly, the actual fluid volume needed in the bloodstream to create that pressure for vaginal transitate is severely depleted.
The tank is literally empty. And on top of the dehydration, chronic alcohol use brings the liver into the equation, which I thought was fascinating, because the liver has to process the alcohol, obviously.
Yes.
But it is also the organ responsible for metabolizing hormones, including estrogen.
Yeah.
And estrogen is the key ingredient for maintaining vaginal tissue elasticity, thickness, and baseline moisture.
Exactly. And when you consume alcohol regularly, the liver is forced into triage mode.
Because it's dealing with a poison?
Right. It identifies alcohol as a toxin that must be cleared immediately, so it diverts its energy away from regulating estrogen.
Oh, wow.
Over time, this leads to a massive estrogen imbalance. The tissues physically thin out, they lose their elasticity and their ability to lubricate effectively.
That sounds awful.
It creates a negative feedback loop where intercourse becomes uncomfortable, which then increases anxiety around sex, which further suppresses the arousal signals.
I always thought alcohol just made you mentally sloppy or tired, but reading through these clinical studies on chronic users was genuinely shocking. We have to talk about alcoholic neuropathy.
We do.
Because this is where the physical damage becomes permanent.
Yeah, up to 66% of chronic alcohol users develop some form of this neuropathy.
66%.
Yeah.
That is huge.
It's a massive number, and it is a condition where the peripheral nerves are structurally degraded. The alcohol and its toxic metabolites, like acetaldehyde, have a direct poisoning effect on the nerve tissue itself.
And it's compounded by malnutrition, right? The sources noted that chronic alcohol consumption inflames the stomach lining,
Yes.
which actively prevents the gastrointestinal tract from absorbing essential nutrients like thiamine, which is vitamin B1, and folic acid.
And thiamine is critical here.
Yes.
Without it, your nervous system cannot maintain its myelin sheaths.
Right.
Myelin is the protective fatty coating wrapped around your nerve fibers that allows electrical impulses to transmit quickly and efficiently.
So it's like the rubber insulation stripping off a copper wire inside your walls?
That's a perfect analogy. Once that insulation is gone, you experience axonal degeneration. The nerve itself breaks down.
Good Lord.
People usually first notice this as a tingling or burning sensation in their hands and feet, which eventually progresses to complete numbness.
Right.
But it also profoundly affects the autonomic nerves, including our friend the pudendal nerve.
So if that physical cable is structurally melted, the arousal signals from the brain simply cannot reach the pelvic floor.
They can't. It results in a profound loss of sensation and severe sexual dysfunction that cannot be fixed just by getting, in the mood.
So returning to the smart home analogy, chronic alcohol use isn't just causing a temporary glitch in the Wi-Fi. It is actively draining the water tank so the plumbing is dry, diverting the repair crew to deal with toxins, and literally melting the wires inside the walls through nutritional starvation.
Yeah, it systematically degrades the entire biological infrastructure required for connection.
That is the grim reality of a CNS depressant.
It really is.
But let's pivot to the other substance highlighted in our stack of sources, because it interacts with the body through an entirely different mechanism. Let's talk about cannabis.
Right. To understand how cannabis functions in the body, we have to look at the endocannabinoid system, or the ECS.
Which is something our bodies just naturally have.
Exactly. This isn't just some niche biological pathway for getting high.
Yeah.
It is a highly conserved neuromodulatory network that exists in all humans. Our bodies naturally produce their own internal cannabinoids.
The most famous one being anandamide, which researchers often call the bliss molecule.
So those molecules, yeah.
So we have a built-in biological system specifically designed to receive and process these compounds, utilizing CB1 and CB2 receptors.
And the location of those receptors is what makes this so relevant to arousal. CB1 receptors are heavily concentrated in the central nervous system.
Okay.
Crucially, they are located directly on the axon terminals of neurons that secrete dopamine and serotonin.
Oh, wow. Which
Yeah.
are the major players in pleasure, reward, and mood.
Exactly.
Dopamine drives the anticipation and the desire, the engine of arousal, basically, while serotonin regulates mood and that overall feeling of well-being.
Right.
So by binding to these specific receptors, the endocannabinoid system essentially acts as a master volume knob for our pleasure centers.
It modulates the release of those neurotransmitters.
Yeah.
And clinical data is really starting to reflect how powerful this interaction is.
Yeah, we have a really interesting study on this.
We do. There was a specific study published in 2025 by Lim et al., conducted at an academic sexual dysfunction clinic in the American Midwest. They surveyed 187 women, the vast majority of whom were actively seeking treatment for female sexual dysfunction.
I read through that data, and the results were striking. They used the Female Sexual Function Index, the FSFI, which is like the gold standard clinical questionnaire for this.
It is.
And they found that women with sexual dysfunction who reported using cannabis prior to sex saw a massive, statistically significant jump in their lubrication scores.
The numbers were really clear. The median lubrication score for non-users in that clinical population was around 1.2.
Okay, 1.2.
For those who use cannabis prior to sex, the median score jumped to 3.2.
3.2. That is nearly triple the baseline score, alongside higher overall arousal markers.
Yep.
But as we've been doing this whole time, we have to ask the mechanical question. We know how nitric oxide causes blood flow. How exactly does inhaling or ingesting a plant translate to physical, localized lubrication?
Okay, so beyond the psychological relaxation and the localized dopamine boost we just talked about, cannabidiol, or CBD, which is a major non-psychoactive component of the plant, it acts as a powerful vasodilator.
Meaning it actively widens the blood vessel.
Right. Just as nitric oxide opens up blood vessels in our natural baseline arousal, CBD helps increase systemic blood flow, specifically driving it to the pelvic region.
Oh, okay.
By dilating those local capillaries, it physically mimics and enhances the natural capillary inflow needed to overwhelm that sodium reabsorption we talked about earlier.
So it's recreating that flood.
Exactly. It actively drives the production of vaginal transudate, combating the physical dryness often caused by sudden estrogen drops, like those seen in menopause.
Okay, I have to play devil's advocate here on behalf of the listener, because anyone who has used cannabis recreationally or even just, been around it in pop culture knows about cottonmouth.
Sure, cottonmouth is famous.
Right. It notoriously dries out your mouth. So if it is such a powerful vasodilator, why doesn't it cause the exact same severe dryness in the pelvic tissues?
It is a highly logical question. But a 2009 physiological study explicitly mapped out why this happens, and it comes down to the fundamental difference in how those two fluids are produced.
Okay, how are they different?
Saliva production in your mouth is glandular. It is actively controlled by the submandibular and parotid glands in your jaw.
Right, they're literal fluid factories.
And those specific salivary glands happen to have cannabinoid receptors that, when bound with THC, receive a direct signal to inhibit the secretion of saliva.
Oh, wow.
That is what causes cottonmouth. Vaginal lubrication, however, is not glandular in that same way. There is no lubrication gland acting as a faucet.
It is entirely blood flow driven.
Exactly.
It's the plasma pushing through the surface tissues from the dilated capillaries.
Because the two systems operate on completely different biological hardware, Cannabis can simultaneously suppress the salivary glands in your mouth while acting as a vasodilator in the pelvis, enhancing the localized blood flow required for arousal.
The hardware distinction is just fascinating. But we also need to be clear that this isn't some flawless magic bullet, right?
Definitely not.
If a listener thinks, great, I'll just consume as much cannabis as possible to fix my arousal issues, the research shows that will likely backfire entirely.
Yeah, dose dependence is perhaps the most crucial caveat in all the literature we reviewed. Cannabis operates on what is known as a biphasic effect.
A biphasic effect.
Yes, it does two entirely different things to the nervous system depending on the concentration.
Okay, so at low doses, the sources indicate it acts as an anxiolytic. It reduces anxiety. It quiets what they call the spectatoring part of the brain, that internal self-critical monologue that constantly evaluates performance and blocks the CNS from sending arousal signals down the spine.
It allows a person to actually inhabit their body and relax into the sensory experience.
But at high doses,
At high doses, particularly with high THC strains, it becomes anxiogenic.
so it causes anxiety.
It triggers anxiety, paranoia, and an overactive stress response that will completely derail sexual desire and just shut down physical responsiveness.
Wow.
A 2024 review in Psychopharmacology made it very clear. Lower doses correlate with the highest levels of physiological arousal and satisfaction. Overconsumption actively inhibits the very mechanisms you are trying to enhance.
Finding the minimum effective dose is key to boosting the signal without overwhelming the hub.
Exactly. And the delivery method is evolving rapidly too. The research is moving far beyond just inhalation or edibles and looking at highly targeted applications.
We're talking about things like suppositories, right?
Yeah, we are seeing incredible clinical outcomes with CBD-infused vaginal suppositories. One recent study focused specifically on gynecological cancer survivors.
Oh, okay.
These were patients who were suffering from severe sexual pain, pelvic floor spasms, and profound dryness due to their treatments.
And by using a localized suppository combining a full-spectrum extract with a natural carrier, they essentially bypass the lungs and the liver entirely.
The localized delivery engages the cannabinoid receptors right there in the pelvic floor. It helps relax the hyperactive muscles that often spasm in response to chronic pain, and it dilates the local blood vessels to boost that necessary capillary inflow.
So patients get the physical plumbing benefits, the vasodilation and muscle relaxation without the intense systemic mental high.
Exactly, and we are seeing similar case studies providing profound relief for menopausal women dealing with atrophic vaginitis.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener? Let's pull all this research together. We started by looking at the baseline mechanics. The central nervous system controls your physical arousal through a delicate, hypersynchronized symphony. The brain's emotional centers say, go. The pudendal nerve carries that electrical message down the spine, and chemicals like nitric oxide widen the local blood vessels to create natural, pressure-driven lubrication.
And we saw how drastically different substances can intercept that system.
Right. It is the difference between cutting the power to the whole house with a CNS depressant versus using the endocannabinoid system to turn up the specific dimmer switches for serotonin and blood flow.
Exactly.
Chronic alcohol acts as a physiological saboteur. I mean, it might trick your brain into feeling socially relaxed, but it actively dehydrates your mucosal tissues, it disrupts the liver's ability to balance vital estrogen, and through nutritional starvation, it literally melts the nerve cables required for physical connection.
It's devastating. Conversely, cannabis represents an entirely different pharmacological pathway.
When used correctly.
Yes. When utilized carefully at low targeted doses, it interfaces with our internal endocannabinoid system. It can physically dilate blood vessels to mimic natural engorgement, reduce the inhibitory mental anxiety that blocks arousal signals, and amplify the baseline neurotransmitters required for a healthy sexual response cycle.
But I want to explore a much larger idea before we wrap up today. Something buried in the research that, honestly, completely reframed how I view this entire topic.
Okay, let's hear it.
We established earlier that the endocannabinoid system isn't just a novelty network for pleasure. It has a fundamental, deeply integrated role in the entirety of the human reproductive cycle.
Oh, absolutely. It regulates initial fertility, embryo implantation, bone density, sleep architecture, and mood stabilization all the way through menopause.
Right.
It is inextricably linked to our basic biological survival.
And when you realize how vital this internal system is, you have to look at the environment we currently live in. We exist in a fast-paced, highly stressed, sleep-deprived world. We are constantly flooded with cortisol from endless emails, news cycles, financial pressures.
And that chronic, unrelenting stress has a measurable physiological cost. It actively depletes our endogenous cannabinoids. It drains our natural reserves of anandamide.
Which raises an incredibly provocative question that researchers are only just beginning to explore. Could the massive epidemic of modern sexual dysfunction be linked to a systemic clinical endocannabinoid deficiency?
That's the big question.
Meaning, when people feel utterly disconnected from their bodies and seek out external substances just to help them connect intimately with a partner, maybe they aren't just looking for an escape. Maybe they are actively, blindly trying to supplement a vital biological system that modern life has completely depleted.
It suggests that our modern inability to connect isn't necessarily a personal failing, but a physiological deficit driven by chronic environmental stress.
Huh.
We are running on empty hardware.
Are we just self-medicating a systemic deficiency? That entirely changes the conversation around intimacy, stress, and chemical assistance.
It really does.
We started today talking about how diagnosing these issues isn't clean or simple. The waters of human sexuality are incredibly complex, but by understanding the actual wiring and the plumbing and how substances either melt those wires or boost those signals, hopefully, you have a little more control over your own biology today.
Because knowledge of the mechanism is the very first step toward reclaiming your physiological balance.
Thank you for joining us on this journey. Keep questioning the things you've always been told, keep looking under the hood, and we'll catch you on the next deep dive.